All right. Good morning, guys. Bright and early.
Yeah, man.
Bright
Good
and
morning.
early.
All these kids being quiet so far.
Mine's at
Uh,
school, so I'm good.
Oh, mine are 10 feet away, so I'm shaking here.
so, Jammal Lemon, Brian Alberts, thank you for joining me. At Good Beer Hunting, you're kind of like our core source material team, which is something that's been has sprouted at GBH in the last couple of years. Source
Yep.
material is our sort of investigation into the history of beer and beer culture, with a specific intent to connect it to what's happening in our world right now in a variety of ways, whether it's beer laws or economics, race and gender, and all of the things that are influencing so much of what we think about when it comes to beer now. In the words of Battlestar Galactica, everything that has happened before will happen again. That certainly seems to be the case in the beer world. Of course, it always seems to have its own version of those events later on. But it's important to connect the dots on these things because they're all informed by basic human experience and basic human assumptions and ignorance and ambition and all of these other things, sort of creating a lot of noise and confusion and some opportunity along the way. And this has grown into something that's becoming a little bit more tangible and in some ways more personal and in some ways more important than any of those individual articles maybe that we've published over the last few years and podcasts that we've done could ever be on their own. There's sort of a cumulative effect taking place now, and that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today because we've got some exciting stuff coming up that I wanted people to know about before it happens, and then they get mad at us online that they missed something. We're not here to create some FOMO. We're here to help people get on board real quick because it's coming soon. So I think, Jammal, I'm going to turn to you first to talk about the latest the latest version of source material and what it's growing into, because a lot of it's stemming from your experiences in Charleston and your personal experiences there, and the role of Charleston both now and then, and how those things are connected. So why are we going to talk about Charleston so much?
Well, aside from the fact that yes, that is my hometown, I just and this of course leads to my bias. I just think Charleston holds a lot of American history uh, that I think we all can kind of pull from. Some good, some bad. Now bad. So if we're specifically speaking about beer, there's a lot of talk about community or lack of community or diversity and inclusion. Specifically for Charleston, like I think that fingerprint can be connected to the Schützenfest because a lot of that is wrapped up in there. Speaking specifically from a race standpoint, it could have been, had that exclusion not have happened, like Charleston could have been could have been a good thing for the industry. You have all this influence, and then with Charleston, you have a very strong Gullah Geechee influence, which is tied to the Caribbean, tied to West Africa. I think all of those influences would have eventually found themselves into the beer, into the culture of beer, which could have been,
Which
we
we
don't
saw in the
know.
food, which we still today we see in food.
Yeah, what we see in food, like I just think it was a missed opportunity. And then from Charleston, like who knows how far that would have spun as far as like all that inclusion, all that diversity, all those influences. So for this reason, I just think it was a missed opportunity. And I
That's right.
think, unfortunately, those systems just continue to carry on. And of course, they leaked over into other industries because beer, at the end of the day, is really not that big of a deal, right? It's just 16 ounces of whatever. But I think if we can deconstruct that, and if all of that effort has been put into just beer, into exclusion, imagine what it looks like in politics and all that stuff. And like, I'm only speaking about race, but I think gender also is should be a complement to an unfortunate complement to that equation as well.
Right. Now, Brian, the Schützenfest that we're talking about here was something that you guys wrote a major feature article on, split into three parts because of how important and indicative it was of some of the things that happened in our culture and our nation's history from a race standpoint. And it
Yeah.
also, it impacted economics, impacted the way that beer is thought about culturally now. That ultimately led to a very white beer culture, not just in Charleston, but everywhere, but
Yes.
similar narratives. Give us a quick background on Schützenfest and its role in Charleston history that you guys uncovered through the research.
Yeah, so the Schützenfest was basically a rifle tournament that was soaked in beer, because that's a great combination, right? That has strong roots in German culture, like in Europe, and was brought over by German immigrants. And starting in the 1850s, it kind of appeared in Charleston as kind of this niche event. But by the immediate post Civil War era, and then through the Reconstruction years, it actually became this kind of hub for what essentially became white supremacist expressions and public celebration in the city of Charleston. And this
Like
was a
literal
time,
parades.
yes, literal
Yeah.
parades, and it was very much intended as a counterweight to federal occupation, to the kind of surgences of Black culture that was happening in the city during Reconstruction, when the city's Black community was trying to carve a space for itself that it couldn't under slavery, of course. And so what started out as kind of this niche cultural German event actually got co-opted by white supremacy to become kind of this massive surreptitious expression of white power in the city. And it literally became a vehicle for white terrorists to organize and rally around and prep for the eventual overthrowing of Reconstruction and the reinsertion of white power into the state's governmental apparatus. So the Schützenfest kind of had this operational presence as well as cultural one.
This thing that was bringing a lot of different people together for a while became the exact tool used to separate them and divide them and put them against each other.
Absolutely. It's a story of how insidious white supremacy is, and how German immigrants in the United States actually bought into it because it served their purposes, which of course is not a great thing, but it's what happened.
Now, there was a small team of people that brought that series together. And then you also, that culminated in a great interview that you all did with, I think I'm saying this right, the Herrick Museum in D.C. Herrick in D.C. That was a phenomenal insight as to some of the background on this that I'll link to in the show notes so people can learn a lot more about that particular conversation. But real quick, give us a sense of the team that was involved in putting that 3-part series together.
Absolutely. So there were 4 of us. It was myself, it was Jammal, and then 2 other historians named Mike Stein and Pete Jones, who together make up Lost Lagers, a kind of a beer history consulting firm out of Washington, D.C. They do fantastic work. And yeah, we all just kind of like divvied up the project. We approached the history from different angles. We approached kind of our investigation of Charleston and what it's like and what it has been. And Jammal, of course, took the lead on that because he's a Charleston native. I'm a Midwestern kid. So, but yeah, we were able to all bring different aspects of the project to the table, and it came together nicely.
Yeah, and Jammal, this thing kind of grew a little bit. That wasn't the end of it. Like most people, I think, would write a 3-part series and just sort of take a nap for about 6 months. But you found some other avenues through which you wanted to explore these narratives and kind of bring it into the world to make some real tangible impact. The first is a beer collab, and then the second is a little bit of a festival that we're kicking off here in November. Yeah. Tell us about the beer collab and the story behind that, which is still yet to come.
Yeah, so the beer collab is with Edmund Zost, which is located in Charleston, and in the editorial that we put together, the point that I was trying to make was that Charleston unfortunately does a very good job of whitewashing and erasure, and like Charleston's big on tourism and it's big on its cuisine, and a lot of that is because of the African American Gullah Geechee influence, which is not necessarily the lead on that marketing. And speaking of a brewery like Edmund Zost, who's named after a slave owner who, actually mentions that he had 8 slaves in all, 6 brewers, 2 coopers to brew his beer. But in their marketing, they don't lead with that. It's kind of like there's a disconnect there. So anyway, that's in the story. And then, they eventually reach out and we have a series of uncomfortable yet productive conversations. And as beer folk do, once we get together, we, hey, let's collaborate on doing something. So, we kind of work that thing through. I knew that I would like to see a beer created that complements the cuisine. So it's an American style strong ale, heavy on that ABV, pretty malt forward, which complements the cuisine because Gullah Geechee cuisine can have a tendency to be a bit spicy. So hopefully that malt will cool it off. But I also wanted to as far as like the design for the can and all that. I wanted it to be an art piece more so than just something that you drink. Again, it's very easy to just drink the beer. Not so easy to have the conversation. Specifically speaking of Charleston, because that conversation gets swept under the rug so much.
Well,
So
it gets slipped under the rug so much, it seems like, because of the historicizing of
yes,
all of that history and experience. They treat it as if it's thousands of years in the past, and it's like less, we're 50, 60 years away from a lot of that. And
yeah,
so it makes sense to me that
Yeah.
you chose an artifact that is sort of like a living moment in our culture, a thing that you could imbibe and read and look at and share in a very sort of tangible and living way,
yeah.
rather than something that feels sort of like museum artifact like.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, the easiest thing to do is to drink that beer. It's the easiest thing to do. But before you get to that point, like you have to deconstruct what's on that can. Like if you're going to walk around with that can, I'm not advocating for any kind of violence or anything like that. But if you walk around the city of Charleston with that can and someone sees that can, I think someone's going to ask you, "Where did you get that beer? Why are you drinking that beer?"
Yeah.
And
And it's
but
called Eight and All, which
yeah,
is a reference to the folks who were
yeah.
enslaved.
Yeah, and it's a play off of words because it's kind of like and I don't think this is just in Charleston, but I think there's a separation of history. You have American history, then you have African American history. You have American history,
Yeah.
you have Native American history. So it's like all these divides. When in actuality, that if we're championing Edmund Egan, yet he has these 8 and or 15 other people helping him brew beer, then that's everybody. So it's kind of like a play off of words. This history is everybody, good and bad.
Mm.
And we should, just embrace it, take it for what it is. None of us were there either as slaves or enslaving people. So once we understand that, but we can also be honest and understand that the folk who were enslaving people still benefit from that reality in the past. It's still a thing now. I think we can kind of
It's so much so that it's literally the name on the door still.
exactly. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, like I really wanted the can to be more so of an art piece that would invoke emotion. It's very, it's provocative. And then again, I know that some people will see that can and really not understand. They may just see a portrait of two portraits of a man and may not understand the collar and the Adinkra symbols and one portrait facing one way, the other portrait facing the other. So it's a lot to kind of like talk about.
Yeah. Brian, this is all going to accompany an article that you guys are working on. This should be out in early November. That
Yes.
sort of accompanies the collaboration. So there's going to be multiple ways in which this thing is brought to life. This particular story that we're talking about with Edmund's Oast here. How does this fit into the earlier work you did on the 3-part series? Do you feel like it's an extension of that? Does it take on its own angle? How are you guys working as a team to bring that to life?
Well, it's I would say it's an extension. This is kind of its own story, the Edmund Egan story. It's a little distinct from the Schützenfest. And I think it shows how rich Charleston beer history is, something that I didn't even realize before I started working on this. And also, it kind of just goes to show how one thing can lead to another, and that's what we're hoping will continue to happen. So, the Edmund Egan story is very much a situation where we have very little information to go on, and we have to read against the grain. We have to kind of get the history to tease out in ways that it didn't intend to and that it didn't necessarily want to, which is a kind of an active interrogation. And while we're doing that, it's leading to what I hope is going to just be a step-by-step, but very progressive and very productive process where we constantly are learning something new and doing something new. So, one of the easiest criticisms that might be made about what we're doing, like right now, this festival and this beer is like, oh, they got together and made another collab. Nothing's going to come of that.
Right.
It's a good way to just make sure nothing happens, right? And boy, we hope not. Our goal is very much to just make this the next step that will lead to another step, to generate conversation, to interrogate that much more history, and to inspire that, the next idea that we're going to use to move forward and to do something else with Charleston's beer community, with its beer history, and hopefully with a step toward equity.
Well, it's no small thing, I think, that these uncomfortable conversations that you've had with the folks over at Edmund's Oast about the history of that name is culminating in a beer with an artistic representation of enslaved people on it that are explicitly to tell the story of that great harm. That takes a certain amount of willingness to step into some vulnerabilities there on everybody's part. And at least through this process so far, there's been a great amount of understanding and commonality there that's been sort of inspiring to see. So it is certainly more than an object of beer. It is a representation, I think, of the understanding that you all have been able to achieve through this process so far.
Sure.
And that beer there's going to be a release event in Charleston for that beer at Edmunds Dose. So they're opening up their doors for that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Jammal, that's not where this stopped either. This has gone on to find other collaborators in Charleston, and it's sort of blossomed into what I would call sort of a seed event called the Tek Cyear the Root Festival, which is stemming from that 3-part series with the shared name of Tek Cyear the Root. Tell us a little bit about what that name comes from and how that's translating into an experience that you want to offer people during Charleston Beers Week.
So, Charleston I'm born and raised in Charleston, and I consider myself Geechee or a Gullah. And what that is a direct connection to West Africa and the Caribbean, as far as like the landscape, the cuisine, and most importantly, the dialect. Like you think of Southern dialects, I'm sure there's one stereotypical version. In Charleston, it's like something that you've probably never even heard before. So there's a lot of parables and sayings and fragments that I just grew up hearing all the time, and I kind of use them throughout the day. And people would always ask, "What the hell does that mean?" And it's like, I know what it means, but I'm so used to saying it. So Tek Cyear the Root, the full version is Tek Cyear the Root for a tree can heal. Basically means, understanding the source of which things come. And if you can basically understanding your past to better predict your future or understand your future. And this is the perfect title, I think, obviously biased for this project. And it's so crazy just to see this thing snowball like this. Full disclosure, I didn't know anything about this festival prior to the team bringing me on, and everyone that I mentioned to it in Charleston, like they had never heard of it either. So I think that's where a lot of this kind of like awareness is coming about for this thing, which has led to the beer collab with Edmunds Dose, and now the Tek Cyear the Root Festival in Charleston at Commonhouse Aleworks. And so it's I mean, they have the word festival in there. It's not necessarily a festival where people are just going to be slamming beers and just having a good time. Hopefully they'll
and no rifle shooting, no shooting,
no guns at all.
We're leaving that one in the past.
No guns at all. But it's it's something new that I have never witnessed in Charleston before. It's basically just going to be a community sit down and panel discussion. KJ Kearney, who leads Black Food Fridays, is going to be the moderator. Myself and the Cocktail Bandits, who are 2 African American women who are really heavy in the spirits and beer spaces in Charleston, and they're doing a lot of great work. But
some beautiful art from a former peer of yours.
Oh yeah, so actually the guy who did the can art, Damian Johnson, is one of my great college buddies. We've known each other since 1997, and the flyer and a few other tangible pieces of art will be available at the festival by my good buddy Rodney Buck Herring, based out of DC. But yeah, it's going to be a community talk about exclusion and what that looks like specifically for Charleston. Again, we're not trying to change the world in this thing. This is all very specific from Charleston, but hopefully, I'm going to be arrogant in the fact that like I want a lot of people to know about this, not necessarily know about me or my team or what we did, but like I would like to take this same thought process, this same progressive way of handling issues. I would love for that to kind of like spread. So,
what I really admire about it is that you're plucking this thing from the past that was such an intersection point of so many issues that we're talking about now, and you're sort of breathing some new life back into it. You're reanimating it in a way that gives people a chance to look at it and talk about it and experience it again in a new way and maybe heal a little bit or at least start that process through the lens of just this one particular event. I also love that this project has done such a good job between all of you on the team of combining some real expertise and lived experience with the hard work I know that you've all done of researching and writing and rearticulating what that past was about and how it connects to now. And those kind of combined efforts from everybody on the team really coming together into something that I think is like pretty lush with some opportunity. And it's pretty cool to see. It's certainly more than anybody ever imagined source material could turn into. So Jammal, you are really leading the way on something that combines, storytelling and experience and even the product of beer in a way that is, even for us, where we play in all those spaces as a large group of people at GBH. I think it brings it together in a more elegant and concise way than we've ever been able to do that before. So I think it's really remarkable what you all are doing right now.
Thank you.
We're going to, after this, Jammal, you're going to talk to a few people from the folks that you just listed that are going to be at the festival itself as part of this little preview of things to come so that they can talk with you for a few minutes about what they're bringing to that festival and that experience that people can expect. And so we're going to have you, once we part ways here, you're going to go say hi to them for a few minutes and help people get to know them. All with the hope that for anybody who can and is willing to get to Charleston on November 4th can experience this thing for themselves and meet some of the people that you're about to talk to for a few minutes as our host for the rest of this episode. What does it mean to you personally that this thing is going off in Charleston on November 4th? Like, what are you sort of taking away from this right now, just through the process of making it all?
There's a lot going on, man. I can't lie, I'm a bit scared. Not like fearful for my life, but it's like I like being in the background, and I'm just like I'm kind of being pushed a little bit more in the forefront, which is fine. I actually hate having these conversations, but they should be had. But then on another side, it's good to see ideas kind of just get out there and like working with people. An issue that's kind of like very directly associated and connected with you, but I'm able to link with people where, they may not face the same trials that I face, but we're all on the same page to kind of like create this thing. And like, again, like we would just sit around every Friday night, like 12 a.m. and just talk. A lot of those nights were spent just talking. And just to see where it is now is just crazy. Like, I mean, I'm not a big church going fella, but there's an act of divinity working very heavy with this whole thing. So like, it's one of my greatest things that I've ever done, aside from being married and having my son. But yeah, it's pretty awesome, man. I can't even lie. Can't lie.
Well, we're proud to be working behind you and supporting you all the way.
Absolutely.
You've put together a great team here with the rest of the researchers and writers as well. So good on you.
I think so.